from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. In today's lineup, K-State's Sarah Lancaster will discuss field sprayer preparation for the next growing season and why installing new spray nozzles might well be worth the time and investment given the expected shortage of some popular herbicides and the subsequent rise in herbicide costs. Also in today from the Farm Service Agency, Nicole Welborn. She'll announce another opportunity for you Kansas landowners under the Continuous Conservation Reserve Program, which will pay landowners to preserve playa areas in crop fields as migratory bird habitat. And on this week's edition of Milk Lines, K-State's Mike Brouk will focus on alfalfa feeding management for lactating dairy cows. All that ahead on this Agriculture Today. You are tuned in to Agriculture Today. Thanks for joining us once more. You crop producers have a great deal of off-season duties you'd like to take care of while you have the time to do them. Among those would be servicing that equipment out there. And one of the things you might be thinking about now is making sure that your field sprayer is up to the task as we head into the next growing season. With the expected high cost of herbicides, there are some things you might want to think about as far as nozzle selection and performance on that sprayer. And our guest now has been talking that up on the meeting circuit already this winter. She is Sarah Lancaster, Weed Management Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. There are some things that can be, as you put it, Sarah, controlled, and there are things that can't, but this would fall under that former category, you say.
That's right, Eric. As we think about the herbicide supply issues that are being forecasted for the summer of 22, I think one of the important messages to get out there to folks is that we need to control the things that we can control that influence the effectiveness of each application that we make. Some of the word that I'm getting is that given the shortage, resprays because of poor applications are pretty much going to be out of the question. If you're thinking you're going to put on a second application of a glyphosate-based or a glufosinate-based product coming next summer. So yeah, we spent some time at the crop pest management schools this week just talking about controlling the things that you can control that influence spray coverage.
And one of those might be nozzle selection then?
And absolutely, nozzle selection and also just nozzle replacement, right? I get it. If you do the math, a 120-foot sprayer with 20-inch spacings has 72 nozzles on it. So, it adds up, right? It's not a trivial investment of time or money. But especially on a year like this, I think it'll be money well spent for guys to think about that. So, now is a good time, right? You mentioned earlier about never having a shortage of things to maintain in the winter, right? So now is a good time to be thinking about that and how folks are going to prep for those spring burn down and spring pre-plant treatments that are going to be so important going forward.
If one then decides they are going to outfit their sprayer with a whole new set of nozzles right down the boom, what things might they be thinking about in as far as nozzle selection?
So, nozzle selection in a lot of cases, as we think especially about our soybean production systems, is kind of dictated by the label, right? So for our Extend and Enlist systems, they have a specific or a list of specific nozzles that can be used. A lot of products will have verbiage on the label that indicate what type of output you should look for from your nozzle. So, when we think about a spray application, we're looking for good coverage, right? And so spray coverage is essentially a function of droplet size and droplet number. Right, so as we're thinking about spray tips, you have air induction types of nozzles, the Venturi style, that introduce air into the droplet and form those bigger droplets. Those are not necessarily going to lead to good coverage. As we think about things that lead to good coverage, we want good uniform distribution of droplet sizes, but we don't want driftable fines. The other thing to think about in terms of coverage is that our spray tips, most farmers understand this, most applicators understand this, but spray tips are set up to have 50% overlap. So that means if you look at the output from an individual nozzle, there's sort of a bell-shaped curve that scientists like to talk about normal distributions, right? There's more coming out of the middle, and it tapers off evenly to both the left and the right side of that midpoint. And so one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about in the workshops this week, aside from, that initial selecting the nozzle to get the right droplet size that matches your other application parameters, your pressure, your speed, all of those things. After you've got that initial selection made, so let's say you've got your sprayer outfitted, well, now you've run 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 acres worth of chemical through that machine. Well, now let's think about what's happening to those spray tips, right? So a lot of times what happens is that pattern, instead of being that nice, even, I'll use the term, that bell curve, that normal distribution of the volume of output coming out of that tip, we end up with maybe a high peak in the middle or sort of a tail to one side or the other where that output becomes unevenly distributed. And so then that overlap doesn't occur. And that's when we start to see breakdown in coverage and then consequently breakdown in weed control.
A new set of nozzles, though, will cure those ills as far as uneven distribution, by and large, won't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you have we were sort of talking about this with some of the farmers. They were kind of joking with me that, they'll change their tips maybe at the beginning of the season or maybe their threshold for changing tips is when they flip the sprayer on and they look back there and they see that the pattern's not right. Everybody's got their own threshold, but they don't always throw those tips away, right? You're still going to replace everything in general, unless you have a specific reason to replace one and the others don't have that much wear. I think the other thing maybe that is important to think about, and so one of the things we did with the demonstration was 2 tips off of the same boom. One of them still had a pattern that looked decent, and the output was pretty close to being right. If the ideal was 0.14 gallons per minute, this used tip was putting out 0.13. The spray cards that we were doing, the water-sensitive cards we were using, sometime half the time probably, they gave a decent pattern. But there was another nozzle off of the same boom that was just junk.
Off.
Right? Yeah. It was definitely plugged, but it also had some other issues as well. It was like maybe 2/3 of the level of output, and the pattern was just no good. And so just recognizing that those tips, even though they're all on the sprayer, they're not experiencing the same conditions, right? And just being aware of that, I think, is important.
And to be aware of that, one, at some point, even if they completely change out that set of nozzles, needs to calibrate that.
Absolutely.
And you had some thoughts on that as well in your presentation about measuring that output.
Yeah, so, as a research scientist, I'm kind of a stickler for calibrating our spray equipment that we use for our research plots. My graduate students don't like it when I make them get out the cups and the graduated cylinders. Farmers don't like it when they have to get out cups and graduated cylinders and all that kind of nonsense. So there's a little tool, and it's basically an electronic calibration tool, sprayer calibration tool. Basically, you turn it on and you make sure it's reading the right output that you want, and you just collect the output, the water that's coming out of a particular tip. Depending on the flow rate, it takes 30 seconds or less, and you can get a measurement of the output from that boom. So, as we think about just good operating procedures, maybe that's something we want to think about doing on a more regular basis, especially if we start to see problems with spray patterns and things like that.
In season, not just preseason.
Yeah, not just preseason. And not that you need to check every single tip every single day, but maybe over the course of a period of time, you want to make sure you're checking them regularly.
Calibration serves more than one purpose here. If you have a nozzle issue, for sure, it identifies that. If you have an issue with the pump that's not getting product out evenly, that will show up too in that calibration, will it not?
Today's sprayers, Eric, so 20 years ago, I would have said, yeah, absolutely right. But today's sprayers are so governed by electronics, right? A lot of them adjust pressures and adjust outputs based on speed of the sprayer. So that's a little bit of a different beast, I think, than maybe what my crew has to do with our very low-tech plot equipment.
The error level is considerably less.
Yes.
But
There are fewer things that we can see and fix that go wrong.
But nonetheless, producers, if they see something dire as far as product delivery, they need to address that in the off season, without question.
Yeah, and I think, the main message here is just to be proactive, right? We kind of led this conversation with this idea of controlling what you can control. Mm-hmm. And so, not waiting until you see problems, but just going ahead and being proactive. If you've run a set of tips for, a season or more, probably time to start thinking about it.
It makes good sense. In fact, you have been, again, talking this topic up of nozzle performance and seeking the greatest efficiency in spraying at these crop pest management schools. And there is, in fact, one more of these set. You'll be on that program as well for the 21st of December. This is a virtual presentation, so if folks would like to get on board with that, they should do so soon.
That's right. So there's a group of agents that have worked really hard to put together the virtual option for folks to get their applicator license credits. I think registration ends, the 17th? Is that correct?
This coming Friday.
So it'll be a good opportunity to kind of catch up on some of those credits if you're needing some here at the end of the calendar year.
They've put together a terrific program for the previous two and likewise for this last crop pest management school, covering spray management of various pesticides, covering weed identification, insects, diseases, dealing with them, and so forth. If you'd like to be part of this virtual presentation, go to sunflower.ksu.edu, and you'll find the details there on the K-State Crop Pest Management School virtually on Tuesday, December the 21st. Sarah, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Eric.
She is a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Sarah Lancaster will return with more. You're listening to Agriculture Today. We're back now on Agriculture Today, and for you now, another briefing from your Farm Service Agency, state headquarters for Kansas, and more directly, the Conservation Price Support Division. Several developments that we wanted to pass along to you. Joining us now, Agricultural Program Specialist Nicole Welborn via phone today. Nicole, we'll spend most of our time talking Conservation Reserve Program and the continuous CRP. Before we get to that, though, some recent developments of importance to our dairy producers out there. A couple of new sign-ups are now on offer to dairy operators, right?
Yes. As of today, there's a new 2022 Dairy Margin Coverage, or DMC, annual sign-up, and that runs from today until February 18th. And then also there is what we call an expanded 2022 Supplemental Dairy Production sign-up. And with the DMC program, it provides dairy operations with a risk management coverage that pays producers when the difference or the margin between the national price of milk and the average cost of feed falls below a certain level chosen by the participant. That coverage is based on their production history. All dairy operations in the U.S. are eligible for DMC regardless of their structure, as long as they commercially produce and market cow's milk. The Supplemental Dairy Margin Coverage Program is a specially authorized part of DMC that was authorized in 2021. It will run through the end of the 2018 Farm Bill, which is December 2023. And Supplemental DMC, of course, goes along with the dairy margin coverage, and it is for small to mid-sized operations with less than 5 million pounds of DMC established production history that have increased their milk production over time prior to 2020. The SDMC special sign-up will allow them to establish some newer production history that would, of course, affect their coverage levels under DMC.
And in the case of both of these alternatives, again, the key date is February the 18th. The sign-up has opened as of this week, and they have until that deadline to enroll in either of these, correct?
Absolutely. We encourage them to contact their local service center. There are some enrollment stipulations as far as the Supplemental Dairy Margin Coverage Program goes, so you want to contact your local FSA office to make sure you're doing everything in the correct order and providing all that we need to make sure we get you enrolled in the correct program in the right order.
Always a good idea to have that conversation with your local FSA staff there. Well, this week also, you say, Nicole, is the beginning enrollment period for the CRP State Acres for Wildlife Enhancement program and a specific phase of that program. You might explain.
Sure. Today's sign-up begins for the Kansas and Nebraska CRP Migratory Birds, Butterflies, and Pollinators SAFE program sign-up. SAFE is a State Acres for Wildlife Enhancement program, like you said, and it allows us to target specific state wildlife needs. So this particular CRP Migratory Bird Safe project is a joint effort by FSA and its conservation partners in Kansas and Nebraska, focusing on the preservation and restoration of playa wetlands in certain areas in western Kansas and throughout Nebraska.
Of course, this begs a definition here, so folks are clear on what a playa is. What does the program consider a playa area?
A playa is a shallow depression that often fills with water after spring rainstorms, and it provides habitat for a multitude of species, birds, aquatic species, and as well as playing a critical role in recharging the underlying aquifer. So farmers out in western Kansas can identify them. They are usually always wet and muddy in the springtime and almost impossible to plant, certain depending on the size of the playa, but that's how you can kind of identify them on your property. If you're wondering what that is, it's like what we call a playa in the conservation world.
And the CRP Migratory Bird Safe program here, it's very much like other forms of the CRP, is it not?
Absolutely. It is a continuous CRP-based practice, and it has an underlying sub-practice of a wetland non-floodplain. So CP23A is the sub-practice under the Safe Migratory Bird. It's a continuous program. Although with it being a safe project, it's allowed some kind of fun things that we don't get to do with the regular CRP. So it's a safe project. It uses a competitive bid process. The landowners can submit an offer to enroll eligible playas in the program for an amount that they are willing to accept as an annual payment up to the county irrigated rental rate per acre for a contract term between 10 and 15 years. And then, of course, there are also some other incentives available, what we call our sign-up incentive payment. That is based on your rental rate per acre. And these are both one-time payments. And then a PIP payment, which is based on the cost of establishing the practice and how much cost share is received from that. That's tied directly into that, the practice incentive payment. And there's some opportunities for financial assistance with costs associated with establishing the conservation practice, both from FSA and from outside partners.
And just to clarify here, the kinds of conservation practices that this program will support, what are the land treatments, if you will?
It's a wetland restoration or preservation, so you are using wetland restoration, non-floodplain sub-practice, and with that, you're restoring the playa or wetland area to its maximum extent based on our technical service provider determination. And then you also establish a native grass buffer around the wetland to help filter the fertilizers and sediment from refilling into the playa. So the restoration efforts can include dirt work and, establishing the buffer. And the buffer can be up to 4-to-1 ratio. So you have some flexibility to determine what size you want on the outlying buffer, and then, of course, whatever your playa ends up being, maximum restoration on that.
Well, again, as you noted, Nicole, this Migratory Bird Safe program is part of the continuous CRP. So remind us of what need be done here if producers are interested in this.
It being a continuous practice, you can come in at any time and submit an offer on a continuous basis. And these submitted offers will be ranked at intervals under this program. So any offers that are not submitted by the first cutoff date or that aren't successful during the first round They will be carried over for consideration during the next round of ranking. The first round of ranking to be considered under that round is complete offers must be submitted at your local USDA Service Center by February 18th, 2022.
So producers interested in this aspect of the continuous CRP, they do have a window of time, but time passes quickly, as we know. So if they have an idea that they might be inclined toward this program, they need to start pulling the application process together. This is among many other continuous CRP opportunities. We need to remind folks of that as well, Nicole.
Absolutely. Currently the continuous CRP program is available. And those target sensitive lands, oftentimes buffers around fields, grass waterways, wetlands. As we said before, filter strips along stream banks, contour strips with terracing, things of that nature. So those are what's available right now under the CRP program. And then, of course, statutorily in the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, there is a general CRP sign-up that will happen each year. So we are awaiting announcement of the next general CRP sign-up. But currently we have continuous available in all offices. We just want to encourage you to contact your local FSA office if you're interested in this SAFE program or any of the other continuous practices that we have available. To find a local office, you can visit farmers.gov and look for the Service Center locator. And we do encourage interested parties to call the office in advance as COVID continues to affect availability in offices throughout the state.
Very well. Once more, the date is February the 18th to apply for this new CRP Migratory Bird SAFE program. SAFE stands for State Acres for Wildlife Enhancement, and it is especially designed for those who have playas on their farm ground and would like to assure that they are converted back into a state that will support migratory birds and other wildlife for the purposes of satisfying this program and the compensation therein. You can ask more questions, as Nicole says, from your local FSA folk, and they can give you more about this opportunity. Well, Nicole, thank you once more. Always something happening at the FSA, and we appreciate the overview of all of this. Take care.
Thank you.
Nicole Welborn, Agricultural Program Specialist with the Farm Service Agency, State Headquarters for Kansas. We feature the very latest on USDA programs out of the state FSA office every other week here on Agriculture Today. In a moment, this week's edition of Milk Lines. This is the K-State Radio Network.
You are tuned to Agriculture Today, and it is time for another edition of Milk Lines, featuring K-State Research and Extension Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk, with his input on the utilization of forage resources in a dairy herd's diet. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning the availability of alfalfa hay across the state, as well as pricing and some things that you should be thinking about as you decide whether or not you should include alfalfa hay into your dairy diets. As we look at most dairy diets, they're going to contain a significant amount of alfalfa hay, usually somewhere between 10 and 20% of total ration dry matter for lactating cows. However, over the years, we've seen that start to slide, and we tend to include less and less alfalfa and more add some additional straw or maybe some other higher roughage feeds to the diet, rather than increased amounts of alfalfa hay. A lot of this has been associated with the fact that on a price basis, particularly in terms of the energy content that alfalfa hay brings to the diet, it's been fairly pricey for us. However, with the increases in the protein markets and increase in the cost of things like soybean meal and other protein sources for our dairy cows, alfalfa hay's protein value tends to bring it up the chart as far as whether or not it's a valuable feed for your lactating dairy cows. So as we look at prices across the state, they've actually been fairly stable the last several months as we look at alfalfa hay. It all depends on quality, and that's probably one of the biggest issues that we run into with alfalfa hay is there's just such a range in quality. And a lot of that is reflected in the prices. You know, you can buy alfalfa hay probably for around $130, $140 a ton, but it's not very good quality. Including very much of that into a lactating cow diet will generally reduce the total dry matter intake of our herd as well as reduce the level of milk production. So when we start looking at alfalfa hay that is really of the quality that we should be feeding to our dairy herd, particularly the lactating dairy cows, what's it going to cost? Well, in today's market, we're probably in that $180 to $200 a ton. If you're looking at the higher quality, higher RFV hays that are over $200, you're probably looking at more like $220, $230 a ton. So as you look at the price of soybean meal maybe being somewhere between $375 and $400 delivered to your farm, alfalfa hay, even at $200 a ton or just a little more, is actually probably a fairly economical ingredient to include into the diets. Again, I want you to be careful about the quality of hay that you're actually buying, making sure that you understand what you're actually getting for the dollars that you're paying. So effective testing is very, very important. Dealing with alfalfa dealers or hay handlers that have a good reputation and deliver what they say they're going to deliver is very important. It's also important that you take the responsibility of ensuring that what was delivered was actually the quality that you had priced out with the supplier. So additional testing on the farm is going to be necessary to make sure you're getting what you're actually paying for. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take a hard look at alfalfa hay and pay attention to the quality which they are actually purchasing for their herds.
Thank you, Mike. Before we go, a quick note that the Plant Pathology Diagnostic Lab at K-State is offering free soybean cyst nematode testing. K-State agronomist Jane Lingenfelser discusses the details.
I would encourage everyone to take advantage of free SCN testing by the Plant Pathology Diagnostic Lab. Get those samples before the ground freezes this year, and samples can be sent to your local extension office or straight to the lab. For more information about SCN testing at no cost to you, please contact Judy O'Mara or the Plant Pathology Diagnostic Lab. That phone number is 532-1383.
That was K-State agronomist Jane Lingenfelser. That's all the time we have today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Shelby Varner, and this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.